Hello, I'm Michelle Williams Gamaker. I'm a professor in fine art at Goldsmiths, and I'm also program leader for a particular reality. And I would say that my research interests are very connected to the histories of 20th century British and Hollywood studio films, and particularly focusing on the marginalised film stars of colour who worked within the industry mainly between the 1920s to the 1950s, early 60s. So film stars like Sabu, who was of Indian origin but gained American citizenship, Anna May Wong, who was a Chinese-American actor, and Merle Oberon, who was identified as Anglo-Indian, but throughout her life passed as white, and as a result had a really strong career in Hollywood and British cinema. So I'm always looking to these labour histories and specifically thinking about this idea of making films that are under these three ways of making that I call fictional activism, fictional revenge, and fictional healing. So I had an exceptionally wonderful 3 years of research leave with the British Academy, which was the Wolfson Fellowship, and in that time it enabled me to focus on major exhibitions and moving image work. For the South London Gallery, I made Thieves, which was my first film in fictional revenge, and that travelled to Dundee Contemporary Arts and to Blue Coat in Liverpool. And I was also commissioned by the British Film Institute to make Oberon, and this led me to work with Matt's Gallery for a larger piece focused on the actor Merle Oberon, which was the exhibition Strange Evidence. So this period of time was really about developing what I had said I would do on my research leave, which was to kind of extend my project in fictional activism to think about making films as fictional revenge and also fictional healing, which is where the Merle Oberon project sits. In particular, this is a project that I would say tried to make much more transparent the idea of what it is to make a film, partially because I'm very interested in 20th century fiction machine, how fiction was constructed, how identities were constructed, and specifically the kind of labour barriers that existed within that period of filmmaking. So I would say that in a way my project has a core interest in an idea of critical affection, that within my storytelling I can do a double move between critically unpacking the histories of films that I absolutely loved as a child and teenager, but within those films are very glaring and structurally problematic conditions such as racist makeup techniques, the casting out of actors of colour for white actors, and indeed structures that meant that there was very little progression for performers of colour, particularly things like the Hollywood Hays production code, which basically meant that no performer of colour could co-star with a white actor and have a romantic lead, which often meant that these performers were marginalised into sidekick roles. So the idea for the Matt's Gallery show was that I had, on the film set of Thieves, I had introduced the idea that we could also make a film set that tried to enact or embed a model of good practice, or to consider making the film set much more structurally just, or and that meant basically including 20 emerging filmmakers. So actually many Goldsmiths alumni were part of that initiative, with paid work and opportunities to be on set in different positions, from camera to props to costume. And by the time I made Strange Evidence, I wanted to have a very kind of transparent installation that would actually be almost a leaky film set in which the audience could walk into the space and step into the film set, listen to the script that would then be shot on the film set. So halfway through the exhibition, we closed the exhibition and actually turned the installation into a working film set, which was really thrilling for me because I think for maybe over 10 years I've been thinking about this idea that a gallery could be a film studio. And of course, filming can sometimes not be that interesting, but for me I was also thinking about what if the film set could double as this pedagogic vessel, a space where we could continue this idea of mentorship, but also put right some of those fictional injustices by thinking through a better labour model.
Recovering after the crash must have taken all your reserves.
I think they've done a marvellous job.
You know, this is something that I also feel is part of opening up the back end of film production by also showing how a script gets made. So I often collect movie ephemera and film memorabilia, and as a result I have a kind of eBay addiction but it enables me to look at the film styles that I'm researching and almost to kind of write into the texture of the image. You know, there's something in the images of production from that period where a film star is framed, but my question is always what happened just before the photo was taken and what happened directly afterwards. And I feel like that's this speculative dimension of the photographic documentation of these stars, that's where I want to write my film scripts. And so my research is often based in film historical research, but it's also based in a kind of fandom or speculative longing for these film stars to have more creative agency. There's something that I'm starting to understand, I think, with distance of making, you start to see recurring patterns or themes in the work and in the practice. And there's definitely a relationship to a theatricality or a kind of staginess that comes from the films that I'm interested in, specifically studio films, which built very complex and elaborate film sets. This is something that I have had great pleasure in trying to recreate myself, specifically on the film set of Thieves, but also for this new production, Strange Evidence. And across a number of my works is this relationship to colour worlds and to thinking about colour and black and white and their specific story realities. So Strange Evidence will be a film that's a body horror film noir. The body horror is related to Merle's very complex identity and her history of passing. Her brownness, which could not be revealed, meant that colour actually presented a kind of horror to her. She experienced a car crash and skin lacerations, but she also participated in skin bleaching and actually found it very complicated to be shot in colour. So she felt safer in black and white, but in the film that I'm making, the body horror sequences will present now on the operating table, and the film noir will almost be a kind of detective or investigation film in which there is a crime or there's a kind of studio crime, and Merle will be in black and white and under psychoanalysis. So the attempt of the film is to not psychoanalyze her, but give Merle this chance to be fictionally healed and not to confess to anything, but to explore her identity within the conditions of a psychoanalysis setting. So at Matt's Gallery, I built a psychoanalyst set, an actual office that is the film set. And the idea is that Merle walks into that film set and speaks what she can of her complex relationship with her identity. And I was just thinking about, as a child, this poster was on my wall, and it was a museum that's now closed, which is now the BFI in London, called the Museum of the Moving Image. And it's interesting because I looked at it so much as a child. There wasn't so much by way of the internet or an endless stream of imagery, but there was just this relationship to early 20th century cinema in black and white and colour that really drew my attention. And I spent a lot of time looking at black and white cinema and colour cinema, Technicolor cinema, through the TV at my parents' house. And it's not a surprise that I've kind of got almost stuck in that space of image obsession, and the fandom that I have now is to kind of return to that storytelling mode and to really work with kind of in-camera and on-set special effects. So everything is incredibly analog, and as much as I can not impact it through the digital, working in 16mm film when I can afford to, or working with digital cinematography, but really pushing some of the kind of analog aesthetics of film through the colour grade. You know, I'm sort of constantly trying to reach the texture of that storytelling that actually was like film magic to me as a child. So these are things that I'm constantly playing with when I'm thinking about creating images. So I'm now back at Goldsmiths, and actually very excited to be working with students again. I've missed that more intense relationship of working with emerging artists. But that said, I'm still toying with a few projects that I want to do, almost, I think, maybe to close this almost nearly 15-year cycle of making films in fictional activism, revenge and healing. I'm thinking that I want to do one more casting film on a black actor who was a pioneer of early British cinema, somebody called Lucius Blake, who maybe starred in over 36 films, but unfortunately, because of the racism of the industry, was very poorly credited. I think he's credited about 4 times, of which only twice is his name spelled correctly. I have been working with a film historian called Mark David Jacobs, and we're trying to locate his grave. We've found the area, but he was buried in a scattering ground in Islington and St Pancras Cemetery, and we're thinking that it would be really wonderful to memorialise him properly, and maybe to use this film to get people talking about his contribution to British cinema. And if I possibly can, I would love to work on one final fictional healing work, which would be a musical starring Sabu, Anna May Wong and Merle Oberon and Lucius Blake. That may just take years to make, and I'm willing for it to take as long as it takes. But I always say a final, maybe I should never say a final, but it feels like that would bring things to a close, in which the film stars now have transcended the studio system and have built their own studio, and have left being concerned with labour politics because they've reached a kind of creative space of autonomy. And maybe that they'll sing that rather than speak it. You know, I'm thinking about how the form of my films continuously changes. You know, I'm really interested in those genre shifts. So that would just be fun to write and to make.